Thank you so much, Chantal, for sitting down and getting to chat with me. I get to chat with you, actually. That's
Yeah,
the
thanks for having me.
I'm super excited because I feel like I've heard your work. I've seen your within theater productions, and I've gotten to work with it. But I haven't really gotten a chance to really dig into who you are and the immense other work that you do, because you have a lot. You have a lot that you've
Yeah,
done.
yeah. I think my first band in Calgary was, when I was 19 years old, and that band was called Same Difference.
Same difference, okay.
And yeah, we were together for probably about 7 or 8 years, I think. And then uh, the trio of us from that band formed a group called Maud, which
Okay.
was a trio. And with my first band, I never sang. I just played guitar and wrote songs. And then with Maud, couldn't find a singer. And so I ended up just sort of like singing by default. And the cool thing about Maud is that we recently got asked to, for a couple of our songs to be used in a documentary on feminism in Canada.
In Canada, yeah.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it yet, but my partner Sandy got to see it in Montreal a few months ago. So it was great to be able to know that our music still had, decades later, some sort of purpose and some sort of, audience still. So
Yeah. And maybe you talked about that being your first band at 19, you said?
yeah.
What is that, in a broad sense, like what is the world that you grew up in?
Oh, and you know what? I forgot about the very first band
Oh yeah,
that I was
okay.
in, but I don't think of it as like my first band because I wasn't writing or doing anything original.
Okay.
I was part of a Dutch Indonesian wedding band. And so like I learned all these great like, standards from the 50s, 60s,
Oh yeah.
70s. And it was really great for like learning about song structure and learning about dynamics and stuff like that. And so by the time I was 19, um, you know, wanting to like, create your own sort of thing, it was great to have some sort of experience with playing live and, working with other people.
Yeah, and you have worked with a lot of different people. Like you said, you started with Same Difference, it transitioned into mod, but also like right now, how many bands are you a part of, would you say?
Well, mainly I play with the Love Bullies, which is my main, go-to band. Super fun, all girl, one boy band. Um, and but I also play in a country band called Wild Rose County,
Hmm.
and then also play with my friend Bryson Wayne in the CB. And he's a fantastic kind of Western outlaw country songwriter, fabulous songwriter. So, and then whenever he asks, I still play with Chris Demeter and as part of his crack band. So,
Yeah. And why don't we, like the Lovelies, you were saying that's your main band right now.
yeah.
You have accomplished a lot in the last little while, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, especially, 2023 was kind of like really one for the books. We got a grant to do an album,
Yeah.
and so we booked some time at the National Music Center and worked with Graham Lassard, who's just a dynamite producer, and we put out our album, I think in about April, and by the summer we were um, doing this like a block party
Mm.
in Kensington, and our singer had this idea of like, well, it'd be really fun to have like a spoken word part, and I hear, Grandpa from Heartland, I hear his voice in my head. So we got asked to do this block party, and a few days before we go to play it, the host of the block party phones and says, hey, would you mind if a friend of ours does some tunes with you? Like, yeah, no problem. it's Grandpa Jack. It's, you know, from Heartland.
Yeah.
And so we had a ball playing with him.
Yeah.
And then next thing you know, he phoned us a couple of months later and said, "Hey, got this crazy idea, and I've talked with, you know, I want to have you guys come be part of an episode."
Mm-hmm.
And he had this whole like storyline kind of worked out. And, you know, we went and recorded a song that he'd written
Mm-hmm.
with one of the showrunners. And the next thing you know, we're, you know, 6 a.m. in the morning, we're showing up for our call to go and, you know, be the Love Bullies on a Heartland episode. So,
Which
yeah,
is so cool because you
it's
got
so
to
cool. Yeah.
like Heartland, iconic
Yeah.
in Canada and broader, but to be able to be your band
Yeah.
on stage like that on film is just
Yeah.
really beautiful.
Yeah. And it was such a great day. Like they treated us like gold. And yeah, they were just so nice to work with. And yeah, it was really fun.
And you've been with the Love Bullies for like over a decade.
Yeah, I want to say over a decade. The years kind of meld together, especially with like the COVID thing, the pandemic thing. But yeah, it's been well over a decade, I think. And we've done, you know, even during COVID, we did when we weren't allowed to be like playing, you know,
Yeah.
gigs. We did a COVID-proof edition of Block Heater, which is the winter festival
Right.
that Calgary Folk Fest puts on.
So how would you say that you've shifted or like grown as a musician in the last while?
Well, I mean, I picked up a few more instruments along the way, like on August 8th, 2008,
Okay.
I finally found a pedal steel guitar that was in my price range,
Okay.
but it was like 10 hours away. So I phoned the guy and he was like, "Well, my mom lives like 5 hours away from where you are, so I can meet you halfway." So like I didn't know anything about how to play it, didn't know anyone really who played it, but I went and, you know, drove 5 hours. He showed me how to set it up and he said, you know, now to tear it down, just do it backwards. And, you know, so I went home with like really no concept of like what I was doing. But luckily, right around that time, like YouTube was starting to populate with tutorials from people just willing to share their, you know, their knowledge. And so slowly I learned how to play pedal steel. And that's why I can play in a couple of country kind of outfits now, because, you know, I really feel that's just so iconic and so, you know, so country, you know, like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so.
Well, and I feel like you've used the word or the phrasing do it yourself
Yeah.
in terms of making a career. This feels like a great example of like just do it yourself. Like you found it and you learned
Yeah,
by
yeah.
how else has like do it yourself kind of impacted your career?
Oh, I mean, like, even with Same Difference in Mod, like we would put on our own shows at community halls, and
Mm-hmm.
you know, we were certainly like doing backyard fundraisers for our friends who were in the arts, and especially in Calgary, you know, there's so many great charities and so many great organizations that need the help, you know. So yeah, just really figure it out, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I figured out how to do some recording on my own and in my basement, so I was able to start transitioning to doing composition for films and
Yeah.
moving pictures, you know. So and
Yeah.
living with a filmmaker, you know, was no shortage of so, hey, you think you could help out with this? And I always love the challenge. So.
Yeah. And I know you worked on the artistic taxidermist.
Yes, yeah.
Was that early on in terms of for working on like in composition and scores for film, or was that a little ways in?
No, it was still pretty early on, and my setup at home is nowhere near like as grand or as, you know, as complete as other people's, you know, but what I have, I made it work for what I needed, you know. So with that one in particular, like I was like, oh, that really seems like it could use a banjo there. And so I got a banjo and like figured out how to tune it and, you know, how to play some chords on it. And so, yeah, it's super fun to experiment and, you know, work within the medium.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and then in terms of more feature films, you've also both your solo work and like the Love Bullies and other folks that
Yeah.
have been used. I like Haley Rose recently had both one from your solo
Yep.
album,
Yep.
which the scene is so great, right? The water's
Yeah.
edge, them just singing along, like it's super highlighted in that. How does that feel?
Oh, you know, it was so great to actually see the scene, because I knew that Sandy wanted to use the song, but I didn't know like what the context was or
Mm-hmm.
anything. And so to finally see like these three actors, you know, singing along to my song was so fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, super fun.
It is a great scene. Like I now have that song in my head.
Oh,
Yeah, I
good.
was like singing it this morning.
Good, good. Yeah.
But then also Haley Rose has like other songs from the Love Bullies too.
Yep, we have a song called Trees that Kari Matchett sings around a campfire.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sort of big finale scene at the end, our song Love Letter.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
So it's interesting having music that has already been written, right? Or yeah, put into a film. But how do you approach like composition and creating a score for?
Oh, you know, I don't know. You just sort of, for me at least, I just sort of sit down and look at the scene and just start experimenting, you know, and I can kind of tell pretty quickly if something's going to work or not. I just sort of can sort of feel, you know, I'm sensitive, I think. You know, living with a filmmaker, I think, has made me super sensitive to not overriding anything
Okay.
and to just sort of like, you know, supporting the images instead of trying to, you know, grab hold of the wheel and, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so I think, you know, Sandy's done so many short films before she started doing feature films. And so that was a wonderful way to sort of like, you know, figure out, you know, how to make music match images.
You do so many different things. You've also, in terms of the Calgary Folk Music Festival, you were the artistic associate for many years.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
so being in that spot where you are creating opportunities and supporting other musicians, how does that play into your journey?
Oh, well, you know, I think it was really helpful when I took the job. Actually, the thing that sort of gave me a bit of an edge over other people wasn't actually my music background. It probably played into it, but I think I also had like a lot of database experience.
Yeah.
And so I think that was like, because it's so many moving parts, like my job was dealing with everything that happened for the artists off stage. So
Right.
everything from, you know, food and guests and hospitality and hotels and transportation, you know, to the festival and their merch and, you know, helping with tax stuff, you know, like there were so many moving pieces. And so it really helped to be able to have some sort of knowledge of like being able to like, okay, this is important here now, this is going to be important later, you know, and but also like being an artist, I could tell like if I got in a stage plot and there were like 19 people on it,
You're like,
I'd be like, go over to the production manager and say, hey, just so you know, did you know that this was coming up and stuff? So it was really helpful, I think, you know, and it was a great team. Like we all really helped each other do our jobs better. You know, kept an eye out for each other.
So along with composing and doing score for film, you've also done composition for theater.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know that you were part of the original team that put together Making Treaty 7.
Yes, that was quite an remarkable, and yeah, it was quite an honor to be part of that team that first went out to Banff to collaborate. And honestly, I think it was probably working with Chris Demeanor that I got involved with with some of that crew. But actually going to Banff and for the first time sitting down with Iahe and Nakota, like powwow drummers and singers, and melding this indigenous / settler sound was absolutely it was so joyful, and probably a highlight of my music career, a big highlight. When we started, one of the things that Michael Green sort of set out for us was, okay, so we're going to just write down some words that are, evocative of 1877 September, when the treaty was signed, was train. And so we would, try to think of, train passing through prairie landscape and what that would sound like. And so at the end of were we there for like 10 days maybe? We had this, soundscape that we were able to marry with the scenes that the actors had created. And yeah, it was quite moving, powerful.
Yeah. And so the production making Treaty 7 eventually led into making Treaty 7 the society. And you've worked with them a couple of times since.
Yeah, we did. With them, I did the first, I think, 2 or 3 productions maybe. And then Istotsi, which was the film version. Again, that was during the pandemic. So,
Right.
We couldn't provide, in-person shows. So we did a film version. Yeah, and happy to always support and be part of the Making Treaty 7 Cultural Society, Oh, and the Ministry of Grace. That was
Ministry of Grace.
Right. Yeah, which we were part of.
Yeah.
So that was cool. Yeah. It's a very different medium. And I find, I don't know, it could be wrong, but a lot more disciplined than just being a musician, because like, I could show up to a gig like, like I don't often do this, but sometimes I have to show up like 5 minutes before we play, but I know I can just like throw my amp on stage, get ready, and the sound guys got me. But, theater is so much more disciplined and so much more like, if you're not there like an hour before the show starts,
Well, and it's funny because I think of music and having to gig and create music and all of those things as like extra intense, because there's a certainty in theater almost of like, okay, I show up to this performance space this day, this time,
Yeah,
and I
yeah.
do like, and it is different every night, but the
You know,
I looked
yeah.
at your calendar for the Love Bullies recently, and I was like, wow, there and there and
Yeah,
there and
yeah.
there, and you're touring there and you're touring there.
Yeah, and like as a theater actor, like you don't stray from your, like they don't like it when you ad lib and stuff.
I suppose not.
But yeah, with live performance, there's wiggle room definitely for extended solos or for extended introductions for your bandmates, and there's something really releasing about just going with the flow and not sticking to the same plot all the time. Yeah.
Well, it makes me think a little bit of like structured improv, so, at different points
Yep.
potentially, where having worked with, say, the Love Bullies for quite a long time, how you work together, and how you can offer, make an
Yes.
offer to someone else that they can take. And
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I mean, the really good thing too is like our band currently has, like a couple of weeks ago, I got strep throat, and so luckily the second guitar player knew all my parts and was able to sing all my parts and, did a fantastic job. And I was, just there to play the guitar and that was cool, So it's, yeah, really, there's a lot more freedom, I think, It's not quite as, to an extent,
To an extent, yeah.
For me, I do like the stability of having a job. And I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but I always enjoy the jobs that I have, So I think that's kind of important to me, My current job, I only work 9 to 2 every day, no evenings or weekends, which is like perfect for my creative life. So one of my coworkers said to me one day, "Oh, I just read this article and they said that musicians are really good at picking out anomalies in patterns."
Oh.
And one of my favorite things to do was audit work, entries from other people and find the thing that didn't fit and go like, okay, there's a mistake there, and reconciling it. So yeah, I do think one feeds the other. So
the final question I have for you is what advice might you give other artists coming up in this field, or anything that you're like, I learned this and I'm going to pass it along?
I think what I learned is just do it.
Yeah.
Like just do it. Like if you have some lyrics or some chords, ringing around in your head, like just sit down and do it. And even if it isn't the best, you can always go back to it. You can always amend it. I've done that like decades later. I'll go back to a song and go like, oh, you know what? I just found the right bridge for this.
Oh, wow.
Like, yeah, like, but do it. Like, don't let fear or, anything like that stop you. Like just do the work and you'll be rewarded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And I look forward to hearing that I'm not that kind.
Yeah. Right on.
Thanks.
Great. Oh my goodness. I am so excited to be sitting here with one of my favorite songwriters, Kue Varo. I have been a huge fan of yours forever. So it's really cool to be able to sit down and get to know some of your inner workings. So did you start off playing music in Calgary?
I don't think. I fully know that my first show was in High River, because the manager of the coffee shop I was working at had an underground supper club, and I had just started playing guitar, and I let her know, and she's kind of a spunky lady, and she's like, "You're booked in a month.
Oh, wow.
Learn enough songs." And I was like, okay. And I dropped my pick in the sound hole of the guitar. Yeah, so I've not used a pick since.
Like,
Still don't
seriously?
use a pick, yeah.
Whoa,
Yeah.
that's so funny.
Yeah. I played some bass for some friends' projects too. And then after that was Kue Varo, but slightly different than it is now.
Right.
Because I was out in Montreal. And that was primarily with Rena Kozak, child actress.
Oh,
She
yes.
did the production on the first Kue Varo album.
Oh, great.
And she had a huge part to play in a lot of the creative with that one.
Very cool.
And then now it's Kue Varo and the Only Hopes with my pals.
Yay! Well, your new release, Cowboy Witchcraft.
Yeah.
It's so good. Like, I just loved it from the first listen.
Thank you.
And super catchy songs, and the production, of course, Russ Broom, just fantastic.
Yeah, he healed a lot of my, you know how it is. I think he's a really stand-up man in the industry.
Yeah.
And I've told him that. Yeah, really good producer, but a wonderful person. Very affirming, very validating.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which was, I needed that.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
And I remember reading recently that I think your release was it on the top of CKWA charts?
Yeah, we made #1. I was completely surprised by that. I was crossing my fingers for like top 10.
Yeah,
And then it went from 17 to number 1.
that's fantastic.
Yeah, I got a couple calls from friends because I didn't even check the charts. And they're like, "Hey." I'm like, "What?"
That's
Bobby
so
called me
exciting.
first, and then Yolanda like texted me like, "Hey, congratulations." I was like, "What do you mean?" Like, what's going on? It was
That's
great.
great.
Yeah, it was really nice.
Yeah. And then I know you've got Lockheeder coming up in February.
Mhm.
And you're playing where?
The Palace Theater.
What?
That's a decade of wanting to do that, so I'm so excited about it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
gonna be great. I can't wait.
It's a big room and the big stage. It's going to be so much fun.
Yeah, it's one of the bigger in Calgary for sure.
Yeah.
So it's definitely like, and I've seen a lot of bands I really like there. And you know how that is. You see a lot of bands in a venue, and
Yeah.
you're like, one day.
One day.
You look at the stage longingly.
I know. I've
Yeah.
seen I've seen Brian Setzer in his Christmas show there, which was super fun. Michael Franti, Spearhead, and Orville Peck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was
So
good representation.
yeah. Hey, I wanted to ask you about the thought that goes into the presentation of. Yeah, you want to talk about that?
Of the like imagery
Yeah.
for the band and the music.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. I like to study the occult and a lot of different religions and mythologies and pantheons, and I'm really into symbolism because I like pattern recognition.
Yeah.
And I like to see where there are sort of cross paths between all sorts of cultures and beliefs. So there's some important symbolism to me. The cover of this little magazine, I was wearing my ritual robe my sister hand sewn me, and then the album artwork for Cowboy Witchcraft. Yeah, Jen Shear did it, and she did a great job. I had some symbols that I asked her to incorporate, like the Venus symbol, the Pisces symbol, just various symbols, and then the dragon with a cowboy hat is
Yeah.
a thought form. It's just kind of a magical creature you give meaning to.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting stuff. That's where a lot of my visual art mind is deeply entrenched in, yeah, symbolism, mythology, and all
Oh,
that.
awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, I see a lot of imagery in your lyrics too.
Yeah.
So it carries over very well.
Music elicits like very strong images in my imagination. I don't know if it's the same for you. Do you find that sometimes? Yeah.
For sure.
Sometimes I write lyrics based on what I'm seeing when I'm hearing music, like in my mind's eye. But I feel like every creative brain is very different. That just is, mine works kind of that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you normally write lyrics first and then music, or the other way around? Or
With the band, depending.
yeah.
Yeah. But sometimes I get melody, and then I'll be like, somebody help me make the music to this, because I hear lots of things. And then other times, yeah, if someone's bringing a musical piece to be added to, that's when I tend to listen and hear what the song is already saying.
Yeah.
Kind of like when you'd mentioned scoring, you're trying not to overplay things or add too much. You're like listening to something that supports it. It's like the same if someone has a musical piece.
Yeah.
If I'm writing lyrics to it, kind of a similar vein of like how to approach it. Like, what is it already saying?
Yeah. Kue, I wanted to ask you about the differences between creating music in Montreal, creating music here in Calgary.
Yeah, the communities are very different, and the infrastructure setup is pretty different as well. I think I personally am having a good time creating music in Calgary right now because there's obvious steps to take. And as a somewhat up and coming artist, I feel like it's exciting to be here because it isn't as established as an art community. And there's so many people that are extremely passionate and really sort of like against the system about it,
Yeah.
but also very supportive of one another. Whereas Montreal is great for inspiration because it's an established art community. So art is constantly happening everywhere. Everyone just assumes whoever they're talking to has some sort of creative project on the go, whether it's filming, painting, music, whatever.
Right on. Well, thanks for talking with me, Kue.
Thank you, Chantal.
Yay.
Yay.
Yay.